higher ground. The water was at my ankles when I realized the gravel bar I was standing on wasn't a gravel bar anymore. It was the bottom of a river that had decided, in about 4 minutes, to become twice its size. I want to be clear that I'm not an idiot. I've spent 6 years photographing wildlife in places that would kill you if you stopped paying attention, and I know how to read a canyon. I check weather radar before every trip. I know which drainages flash. I carry more emergency gear than most of the rafting clients who pay good money to be out here. What I didn't know, what nobody 2 miles downstream from a flash flood ever knows until it's already happening, is that a thunderstorm cell sitting over a drainage basin you can't even see from where you're standing can turn a calm, ankle-deep side channel of the Arkansas River into something that wants to take you with it, in less time than it takes to change a camera lens. It was the first time I had faced something like this. I had no idea yet that a storm out there would merge with the storm inside me. My name's Sam Okafor. I'm 22, and that morning I was lying flat on cold gravel in Browns Canyon, Colorado, 300 yards from the nearest trail, trying to get a clean shot of a bighorn ewe and her lamb picking their way down a scree slope to drink. It was the photograph I'd been chasing for 2 months, the one I needed for the bighorn migration story I was building, the one that might finally get me a real assignment instead of another freelance rate that barely covered gas money. I didn't hear the water rise. I felt it, cold, sudden, around my boots, and when I looked up from the viewfinder, the channel I'd waded across 20 minutes earlier wasn't a channel anymore. It was river. Fast, brown, churning river, and it had already eaten the route back to shore. At that exact moment, I didn't hear the sound of the rafting boats. Nico Rossi's family has been running whitewater trips down this stretch of the Arkansas for 3 generations, which is a fact I learned approximately 90 seconds after meeting him, because it's apparently the first thing. He tells anyone in a crisis, like it's meant to be reassuring. Rossi River Outfitters, 3rd generation, I know this water better than my own house. Donotmove, he shouted at me. He was at the front of a raft carrying 4 very alarmed-looking tourists. Paddling like the current wasn't trying to drag all 5 of them sideways into a strainer of downed cottonwood. I'm coming to you. Stay on the rock. Do not try to swim. I want to tell you I did the smart thing and listened immediately. I did not. I took one more photograph, the ewe and her lamb, scrambling for the high ground I was about to need myself, because some instinct in me apparently believes a good photo is worth dying for, which is a personality trait my father has spent 8 years trying to train out of me. Then I climbed onto the only rock on my gravel bar that was still above the waterline, camera strapped tight against my chest, and watched Nico Rossi paddle a loaded raft through water that was actively trying to kill the 6 of us. The expression on his face looked less like fear and more like a man doing long division. He was 24. His sun-browned skin had gone permanently bronze. Dark curls flattened under a helmet, and his eyes were the kind of focus that doesn't flicker even when the raft nearly flipped going over a hidden rock. When he finally got close enough to throw me a line, he didn't look relieved. He looked like a man who just moved one problem from the later pile to the right now pile. For what it's worth, I should probably describe myself too, since my father always says I forget to. I'm Nigerian American, 22, tall and rangy in the way that comes from spending more time hauling camera gear up scree slopes than eating regular meals, with my mother's sharp cheekbones and my father's habit of going quiet when I'm scared instead of loud. I had 3 cameras strapped to my body that morning and exactly 0 plan for what to do if the river decided to misbehave, which, in hindsight, was the actual problem. "Grab on, don't pull, let me pull you," he said, and I had approximately 1 second to decide whether to trust a total stranger's instructions over every instinct telling me to thrash toward the boat. I trusted him, and it was the right call because I came into that raft clean instead of capsizing it. That should have been the end of the crisis. But it wasn't, and that wasn't even the part that scared me, the river's trap. We were maybe 90 seconds back into the current, Nico shouting course corrections to his clients while I sat dripping and disoriented in the bow, when the raft hit something we never saw coming. A half-submerged cottonwood, ripped loose somewhere upstream by the same flash flood that had nearly taken me, lodged sideways across the channel like the river had built itself a trap. The raft folded around it. I remember the sound more than the sight. A tearing, grinding crunch, rubber and aluminum frame giving way at once. And then four strangers, and Nico Rossi and I were all in the water in the same half-second, scattered by a current that had gone from dangerous to genuinely furious in the space of one storm cell passing overhead. The cold hit first, a full-body shock that stole the air right out of my lungs before I'd even gone fully under. Then the current took over, spinning me sideways, slamming my shoulder into something hard enough to bruise, and for 3 or 4 seconds, the longest of my life, I had absolutely no idea which direction was up. I'm a strong swimmer. I should mention that now because it matters. I swam competitively through college, which is the only reason I didn't panic when the current pulled me under a rock shelf and held me there for longer than I'd like to admit. My chest was screaming, one hand braced flat against slick stone, waiting for the surge to ease enough to kick free. I came up gasping, lungs on fire, found a fixed point. Nico, fighting his way toward a woman who'd been thrown clear of the wreck and was caught in an eddy, struggling. And instead of swimming for shore myself, I went toward him. "I've got her. Get the other 3 to the rock ledge," he yelled. He was already hauling the woman toward calmer water, and I realized in that single sentence that he'd assessed all 6 of us, mid-crisis, mid-river, and assigned tasks, like he'd done this exact thing in his sleep 100 times. His composure and certain stance about what he was doing left no room for hesitation. But still, I am not a swiftwater rescue technician. I am a wildlife photographer who happens to swim well and apparently doesn't know how to ignore someone who needs help. I got 2 of the remaining clients to a rock ledge using nothing but stubbornness and the kind of grip strength you build hanging off canyon walls for photographs, dragging one man bodily over a submerged boulder while he apologized to me the entire way, as if drowning would have been the polite option. The 4th, a teenager named Priya, hyperventilating, 12 feet from the ledge and losing the fight against the current, froze completely, arms flailing in exactly the wrong direction. "Swim tow me, not away from the water." "You can't outswim it. You have to go I teach it, at an angle," I heard myself yell. These were words I didn't even know I had until I needed them, half remembered from some safety briefing I'd half listened to years ago. And somehow, it worked. She adjusted her angle, the current helped instead of fighting her for once, and I got a hand on her vest and hauled her onto the rock ledge with the last of whatever strength I had left. Both of us collapsed onto stone that felt, in that moment, like the single greatest surface in the universe, on the rock ledge. By the time Nico got the woman to safety and swam the eddy line back to where the rest of us were sprawled, soaked and shaking on a rock ledge 8 feet above a river still rising, he looked at me with an expression I'd come to know very well over the following months, somewhere between disbelief and something warmer than disbelief. "You're not a client." It wasn't a question. I'm a photographer. I was on the gravel bar. You rescued me 20 minutes ago. And then you rescued my client. He said it like the math didn't add up, like he was recalculating something about the whole situation in real time. "Most people freeze up out here. You didn't freeze." I panic about normal things, apparently not about this. He almost smiled, which on his face, soaked and freezing and counting heads on a ledge in the middle of a flash flood, looked like the most genuine thing I'd seen all day. We were stuck on that ledge for 2 hours while the water peaked and, slowly, agonizingly, began to drop. It was too high and too fast to risk swimming or rafting out, and we had no working radio after Nico's went into the river with the wreck. 6 of us, soaked to the bone, shared one emergency blanket from his dry bag and a granola bar split 8 ways, while the canyon walls boxed in a sky that was finally, mercifully, clearing. Priya and the other clients huddled together, shaken but unhurt, already turning the afternoon into the kind of story they tell at every dinner party for the rest of their lives. One of them, a retired school teacher named Doug, kept insisting he was fine while shivering hard enough to rattle his own teeth, until Nico wordlessly draped his own dry top over the man's shoulders without being asked. That movement told me more about who he was than anything he could have said out loud. Nico and I ended up at the far end of the ledge, half by accident and half not, watching the water for any sign it was safe to move. My cameras somehow had survived the flip, sealed in their housings out of old habit, the one piece of gear I never let myself get lazy about, and I found myself absently checking the settings just to have something to do with my shaking hands. You always carry that much gear into a Class I Rapid? Nico asked, nodding at the camera bag I refused to let out of arm's reach, even soaked on a rock ledge. I always carry that much gear everywhere. It's less a hobby and more a personality disorder at this point. You don't usually take on solo passengers in the middle of a rescue, I said, mostly to fill the silence. Mostly because his shoulder was against mine and I wasn't in any hurry to move it. I don't usually lose a raft to a tree, either. He turned the empty granola wrapper over in his hands like it deserved his full attention. 5 years ago, I lost my cousin Marco on this exact stretch. Boat flip, bad luck, current did what current does. I was 18, I was supposed to be the experienced one on that trip, and I still ended up the one standing on the bank watching instead of pulling him out in time. I've run this river 1,000 times since then, trying to make sure it never happens to anyone else on my watch. He glanced at me. Today it almost did. To you, before I even got there. And then it almost did to all 6 of us at once, and you're the reason it didn't. I didn't do anything you didn't teach me how to do in about 4 seconds on a raft. You didn't freeze! That's not something I taught you. That's not something anyone can teach, actually. I've watched grown men with twice your upper body strength lock up completely the second the water gets loud. He said it plainly, not like a compliment exactly, more like a fact he was still turning over in his own head. I didn't say I'm sorry. I'd learned a long time ago, watching my father grieve my mother for years without ever wanting to hear that word, that it doesn't actually help anyone. I just let the silence hold for a second before I answered him with something true instead. My mom died when I was 14. Cancer, slow, the kind that gives everyone too much time to brace for it and somehow it still isn't enough time. My dad's a retired ranger. He taught me everything I know about reading land and water, and then he spent the next 8 years terrified I'd disappear into it, the same way grief almost took him after she died. I think that's part of why I keep doing this. Not to scare him, to prove to both of us that loving something wild doesn't have to mean losing yourself to it. I looked down at the water, still angry, still dropping. Today probably isn't going to help my case. Today you didn't lose yourself to it, Nico said. Today you helped pull 6 people out of it. There's a difference, and it's not a small one. Something about the way he said it, steady, certain, like he'd already decided something about me that I hadn't decided about myself yet, made my chest do something the cold river water hadn't managed in 2 hours. Are you seeing anyone? He asked, apparently as out of nowhere as it sounds, watching the water instead of me, like the question had been waiting behind his teeth since the rock ledge and finally found a gap to get through. I laughed, which surprised both of us. I spend 10 months a year alone in the backcountry, waiting for animals to do interesting things. The last person I dated called me emotionally unavailable in a tent. That's not a no. That's not a no, I agreed, with the current, not against it. The kiss happened an hour later, after a county swiftwater team finally rappelled down to us with the rope rescue gear, and the water had dropped enough to walk the clients out single file along the bank. We were last in line, soaked, exhausted, adrenaline finally draining out of both of us all at once, picking our way over wet stone in a silence that felt less awkward than it probably should have, given that we'd known each other for exactly 3 hours and had already nearly died together twice. Somewhere on that last stretch of trail, Nico's hand found mine like it was the most natural thing either of us had ever done. Neither of us mentioned it. Neither of us let go either, even when the footing got narrow enough that holding hands made objectively less sense than not. He stopped walking before we reached the trucks, the parking lot lights already visible through the cottonwoods, county sheriff vehicles, and a small crowd of worried families waiting at the put-in. I don't usually do this, he said, in almost the exact tone he'd used to tell me the raft was the 3rd generation of his family's business, like it was a fact he needed me to have on record. Pull strangers out of rivers and then fall for them on a rock ledge. That, and the part where I can't stop thinking about you when the radio's been dead for 2 hours and you're the one calming down my clients better than I am. He looked, for the first time since I'd met him, genuinely uncertain, his thumb tracing absent circles against the back of my hand like he hadn't noticed he was doing it. I want to see you again, when nobody's drowning. I'll bring better snacks than a granola bar, I said, and that was when he kissed me. Careful at first, like he was checking the day, hadn't made the moment up, and then not careful at all. His hand at my jaw, my fist closed around a rescue harness he was somehow still wearing, both of us laughing into it because we were freezing and exhausted and entirely too happy to care. 20 feet from a parking lot full of people who were about to ask us a lot of questions neither of us was ready to answer yet. He found me 3 days later at the put-in, where I was photographing the river at its ordinary, harmless summer level, gentle enough that the same channel that nearly killed 6 people now had families floating it on inner tubes. By midsummer, Rossi River Outfitters had a new set of marketing photos taken by a freelance wildlife photographer who'd somehow ended up spending most of his off-season living out of a cabin 15 minutes from Salida, and a framed print of a bighorn ewe and her lamb hanging behind the front desk, the photograph I'd nearly drowned trying to get, the one that finally landed me a real assignment with a national outdoors magazine. Priya sends a postcard every year on the anniversary, always signed the girl who learned to swim with the current, not against it. Doug, the retired school teacher, still emails Nico every spring to ask whether the river's running high enough for a rematch, which Nico always answers with a polite but firm no. Nico's mother started inviting me to family dinners before he'd technically gotten around to telling her we were dating, on the grounds that anyone who pulled her grandson's clients out of a flood deserved a seat at her table regardless of paperwork. My own father drove out from Denver the first chance he got, took one look at the cabin, at Nico, at the river running calm and silver past the porch, and said only, "This is the loving something wild without losing yourself part you were talking about, huh?" Which is as close as he gets to saying he's proud of me. I keep 3 remote trail cameras set up along this stretch of river now for the Bighorn project that's become a book deal. One of them, mounted on a cottonwood overlooking the exact gravel bar where Nico first found me, has a timestamp burned into the corner of every frame it captures, and a few weeks ago, it caught something that had nothing to do with bighorn sheep at all. Nico, kneeling on the bank at golden hour, holding a ring box he'd clearly been carrying around for longer than either of us knew, and me, camera bag still on my shoulder, dropping it in the dirt before he'd even finished the sentence. The timestamp reads 18/14/06. I said yes before he'd even finished the question. Fixed wildlife trail camera, mounted on a cottonwood at river height, automatic timestamp burned into the corner. 18/14/06, golden hour light on the water. Nico Rossi kneeling on the gravel bank, ring box open, looking up. Sam Okafor, camera bag sliding off one shoulder, hand already reaching down before the bag hits the dirt. The river behind them, calm, ordinary, nothing at all like the day it nearly took them both. Grainy, automatic, time-stamped, caught by a camera meant for bighorn sheep, not for this, and glad anyway. If you made it this far, thank you, genuinely. We're a small channel trying to reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and every single one of you who hits subscribe gets us one story closer to making more of these. If Sam and Nico's story moved you, the most helpful things you can do are subscribe so you don't miss the next one, drop a comment telling us which crisis romance pairing you want to see next, and share this with one person who'd love a good slow burn. We see every comment and we read every one. See you in the next story.